Most people believe inner peace comes from fixing themselves, from becoming more disciplined, more controlled, more perfect. But strangely enough, the mind often grows calmer in a completely different way, not through pressure, but through kindness. Many of us carry a quiet habit we rarely question. When something goes wrong, we become our own harshest critic. A small mistake turns into a long internal lecture. A simple failure becomes evidence that we should have been better. And slowly, without noticing, our own mind stops feeling like a safe place. It's exhausting, isn't it? Living with a voice that never quite lets you rest. Always correcting, always pushing, always reminding you of what could have been done differently. Even on peaceful days, that voice finds something to tighten inside you. And over time, the tension quietly becomes normal. But here's something curious most people never consider. What if the problem isn't that you're too soft with yourself, but that you've been far too hard for far too long? What if peace begins the moment you stop fighting your own mind? What if gentleness is not weakness, but the missing piece? There's a quiet story about a tired man, a forgotten plant on a park bench, and a simple lesson that most people overlook their entire lives. A lesson about how the way we treat ourselves slowly shapes the life we experience. And once you see it, something inside you begins to soften almost immediately. Not dramatically, but just enough to breathe again. So take a slow breath, settle in for a moment, and listen to this small story, because somewhere inside it, you may discover a gentler way to live with your own mind. There are moments when the loudest voice in a person's life isn't the world's voice at all. It's the one inside their own mind. Sharp, impatient, always pointing out what should have been better. On quiet evenings, when everything else settles down, that voice somehow grows clearer. And little by little, it turns the mind into a place that never quite feels safe. The strange part is that many people learn to live this way without noticing it anymore. They wake up already bracing for their own criticism. A small mistake becomes a long internal lecture. A simple delay turns into proof that something is wrong with them. And by the end of the day, their shoulders carry a weight no one else can see. There was once someone who knew this weight very well. His name was Elias. From the outside, his life looked perfectly ordinary. Quiet job, small apartment, a balcony that caught the morning sun. But inside his thoughts, things were rarely peaceful. It often felt as if he were competing against a judge who never took a day off. When Elias forgot something at work, the voice would sigh deeply. When he stumbled in conversation, it would replay the moment again and again. "See?" it would whisper. "You should have known better." Even small things, dropping a spoon, missing a bus, somehow became evidence in a silent trial. And somehow, Elias was always the one on the losing side. Some nights he would sit on his balcony with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands. The city below moved in gentle rhythms, cars passing, windows glowing softly. He'd watch people walking home, laughing, talking, living their ordinary evenings, and he'd wonder quietly if their minds were kinder places than his own, or if everyone carried the same hidden storm. The exhaustion didn't come from work. It didn't come from responsibilities or busy schedules. It came from the constant effort of defending himself against himself. Every thought felt like stepping onto thin ice. One wrong move, and the voice would crack through again. Now and then, Elias noticed something curious. When he spoke to a friend who made a mistake, he was patient. When someone else stumbled, he found gentle words easily. "Hey, it happens," he'd say with a warm shrug. Yet somehow those same words never reached his own ears. One evening, while staring at the quiet sky above the city, a small question drifted through his thoughts. It didn't shout, it didn't accuse. It simply arrived like a soft breeze through an open window. What if peace didn't begin by fixing everything, but by learning to stop fighting yourself? And strangely enough, that quiet question didn't disappear. It lingered there, patient and curious, like the first hint of dawn before the sun decides to rise. Elias didn't know it yet, but this small pause, this fragile opening, was the beginning of something he had never truly tried before, something that would slowly change the way he saw himself. The question stayed with Elias longer than he expected, not like a riddle demanding an answer, but more like a quiet companion walking beside him. During the following days, it would appear at the strangest moments, while waiting for the kettle to boil, while tying his shoes before leaving the apartment. What if peace didn't come from correcting every flaw? What if it arrived in a softer way, almost unnoticed? Elias had spent years believing that pressure created improvement, that the harder he was on himself, the better he would become. After all, that was the rule he had quietly lived by. If he succeeded at something, the voice would say it wasn't enough. If he failed, the voice would say it proved something about him. Either way, there was always tension in the air of his own mind, like a room where the windows had been closed for too long, and slowly he had begun to forget what fresh air felt like. One morning, while watching sunlight spill across the balcony floor, Elias noticed something simple. When a friend struggled, encouragement seemed to help them breathe again, but criticism, especially harsh criticism, made their shoulders tighten. It closed something inside them. So he wondered, almost cautiously, if the same might be true within himself. The idea felt unfamiliar at first, like stepping barefoot onto sand that's still warming under the sun. Could gentleness toward oneself actually create strength? It sounded almost backwards compared to everything he had believed. Yet the thought carried a strange sense of relief. Perhaps the mind was not a machine that improved under pressure. Perhaps it was closer to something living, something that responded to care the way a garden responds to rain. Too much harshness, and the soil hardens. But kindness softens the ground. Elias didn't suddenly change his habits. Old voices rarely leave overnight. Still, the question kept quietly returning, not accusing, not demanding, just patiently asking him to look again. And somewhere inside that quiet reflection, another realization was beginning to form, a realization about the way he had been treating himself for years, a pattern he had never fully noticed before, a pattern that had shaped nearly everything he believed about effort, failure, and worth. And before long, Elias would begin to see just how deep that pattern really ran. Elias had always believed that pressure was the engine of improvement, not because someone taught him directly, but because life seemed to reward it. Teachers praised the students who pushed themselves the hardest. Workplaces celebrated the ones who never seemed satisfied with good enough. So somewhere along the way, Elias quietly made a deal with himself. If he was strict enough, he thought, he would stay ahead of failure. If he noticed every flaw before anyone else did, he could fix it first. And if he never allowed himself to relax too much, well, perhaps disappointment would never catch him off guard. At least, that was the quiet promise behind his habits. So when something went well, Elias barely paused to feel it. A project completed, a compliment from a colleague, a small success. They all passed by like clouds moving across the sky. Nice perhaps, but temporary. His attention always drifted back to what could have been better. Mistakes, however, were another story entirely. Those stayed with him much longer. If he misspoke in a meeting, the moment replayed in his mind for hours. If someone seemed slightly distant in conversation, he wondered what he'd done wrong. Tiny moments grew large under the quiet magnifying glass of his thoughts. Strangely enough, the outside world rarely noticed this battle. Elias smiled politely, completed his work, returned messages on time. To most people, he seemed calm and responsible. Yet beneath that steady surface, his mind rarely rested. It was always adjusting, correcting, preparing for the next potential misstep. Deep down, he carried a belief that felt almost unshakable. Being hard on himself wasn't cruelty, he thought. It was discipline. It was protection. It was the reason he managed to keep things together. Sometimes late at night, another quieter thought would appear. What if all this pressure was the very thing making him so tired? But that idea usually faded quickly. After all, he reasoned, easing up might lead to carelessness, and carelessness was something he simply couldn't afford. Still, the exhaustion was becoming harder to ignore, like a background noise that slowly grows louder over time. And one afternoon, during a walk through a quiet park, Elias would notice something small, almost insignificant, that would begin to mirror the state of his own unseen world. The park Elias often walked through wasn't particularly famous, just a narrow path lined with quiet trees and benches that had seen better days. Still, it had a gentle way of slowing people down. Leaves whispered above the path, and the air carried that faint, earthy smell after the morning watering. It was the sort of place where thoughts seemed to stretch their legs. One afternoon, while following the familiar trail, something caught his attention near a bench. A small clay pot sat crooked beside the wooden seat. Inside it was a tiny plant, its leaves thin and slightly curled at the edges. The soil looked dry, almost dusty. It seemed to have been forgotten there for quite some time. Elias paused without really knowing why. He crouched down and gently touched one of the leaves. It bent softly beneath his finger, fragile, but still alive. The plant hadn't died. It was simply struggling, as if it had been enduring more than it could comfortably hold. Nearby, a watering can rested beneath the bench. Someone must have cared for the little plant once. Perhaps they placed it there intentionally, hoping it would catch sunlight. But days without water had left it weary. Its leaves reached outward, yet they seemed unsure where to turn. For a moment, Elias felt an odd familiarity in the scene. Not sadness exactly, more like recognition. Here was something delicate, exposed to wind and heat, expected to survive on its own. And somehow, it kept trying, even when care had gone missing for a while. He lifted the watering can, noticing it still held a small amount of water. Slowly, almost instinctively, he tilted it toward the soil. The earth darkened as the water soaked in. The scent of damp soil rose gently into the air, and the plant's leaves trembled slightly, as if relieved. Elias sat on the bench afterward, watching the little pot quietly. It struck him how easily something living could weaken without care, not because it was fragile in a failing way, but because life itself needed gentleness to keep unfolding. Harshness alone could never nourish it. He didn't say anything out loud, of course, but as the breeze moved softly through the trees, the image of that small, struggling plant lingered in his mind. And though he couldn't quite explain it yet, something about it felt strangely personal. Soon enough, someone else would notice the plant as well. The following afternoon, Elias returned to the park almost without thinking. The path felt familiar beneath his steps, quiet in the way only midweek afternoons can be. Sunlight filtered gently through the trees, drawing warm patches across the ground. And as he approached the bench again, he noticed someone already sitting there. An older man, calm and unhurried, was leaning slightly toward the small clay pot. The man held the watering can with the kind of patience that made the moment feel slower. He didn't pour quickly. Instead, he tilted the can little by little, letting the water sink into the soil gradually, as if he knew the plant didn't need a flood, just enough to breathe again. Elias paused nearby, watching quietly. "Ah," the man said softly, noticing him. "You're the one who helped it yesterday, aren't you?" His voice carried a warmth that felt oddly familiar, like sunlight after a cloudy morning. Elias nodded, a little surprised that anyone had noticed. "I suppose I just didn't want it to dry out," he replied. The man smiled, the kind of smile that didn't rush to explain anything. "Well," he said gently, adjusting the small pot so it stood upright. "Living things tend to respond well when someone notices them." He brushed a bit of loose soil from the rim with careful fingers. Even that small gesture seemed full of quiet respect. Elias sat down on the other side of the bench. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved softly through the leaves above them, and somewhere nearby a bird chirped as if joining the stillness. The man continued tending the plant as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You see," the man finally said, nodding toward the fragile leaves, "plants like this don't improve when you scold them." A hint of gentle humor appeared in his eyes. "They don't grow faster if you tell them they're doing a poor job." Elias let out a quiet chuckle despite himself. "They grow because someone gives them what they need." The man continued, "A little water, enough light, a place where the wind isn't too harsh." He leaned back slightly, observing the plant with quiet satisfaction. "And when that happens, they find their strength again on their own." The simplicity of his words lingered in the air. Elias glanced at the small leaves, now glistening faintly with moisture. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, the scene stirred something deeper in him. The man hadn't rushed, hadn't judged the plant for struggling. He had simply cared for it as if that were the most reasonable response. And somehow that small moment carried more meaning than Elias expected. The old man seemed to notice the thought crossing his face. He tilted his head slightly, studying Elias with kind curiosity, almost as if he understood that the conversation had only just begun. And perhaps the lesson hidden in that tiny clay pot was about to unfold further. For a while, the two of them simply sat there. The small plant rested between them, its leaves still damp from the gentle watering. The park moved quietly around them. Distant footsteps, a soft breeze, the rustle of branches. The old man seemed perfectly comfortable with the silence, as if he trusted that some thoughts needed space to arrive on their own. After a moment, he leaned forward again and adjusted the soil lightly with his fingers. "People often believe growth comes from pressure," he said calmly. "They think pushing harder will somehow force life to cooperate." He brushed a loose crumb of dirt away from one of the leaves. "But living things don't really work that way." Elias watched him carefully. The man's movements were slow, deliberate, almost respectful. Not once did he handle the plant roughly or impatiently. Even the smallest leaf received careful attention. It was care without any hint of frustration. If this plant could speak, the man continued with a faint smile, imagine how strange it would sound if we scolded it for wilting. He raised his eyebrows playfully. Why aren't you stronger? Why can't you grow faster? Elias couldn't help but laugh softly at the thought. The man placed the watering can back beneath the bench. Of course, he added, that wouldn't help it at all. He looked at the tiny plant with quiet affection. What it needs is safety, soil that holds it, water that nourishes it, light that warms it. Only then does strength return. Something about those words landed gently inside Elias, not loudly, not dramatically, more like a stone dropping into still water. The ripples spread slowly through his thoughts, and suddenly the connection began to form. The old man glanced toward him, as if sensing the realization unfolding. You know, he said softly, people aren't all that different from this little plant. He tapped the edge of the clay pot with one finger. We also grow best when we're treated with care. Elias lowered his gaze to the fragile leaves. For years he had believed that harshness built resilience, that constant self-criticism was the price of improvement. But sitting there now, watching this patient care, that belief suddenly seemed a little questionable. The man leaned back again, letting the afternoon sunlight warm the bench. Gentleness isn't weakness, he said quietly. In many cases, it's the only thing that allows healing to begin. He nodded toward the small plant once more, and Elias began to wonder what might happen if the same kindness were offered inward. The conversation lingered in Elias's mind long after he left the park, not like a loud lesson demanding attention, but more like a quiet melody that keeps returning. Over the next few days, he noticed something he had never really watched before, the tone of his own inner voice. It appeared in dozens of tiny moments. One morning he spilled coffee while reaching for his keys. Normally, the familiar voice would have sighed immediately. Something sharp, something impatient. But this time Elias paused, remembering the small plant on the bench. He took a slow breath instead. Well, that happens, he murmured softly to himself. The words felt strange at first, almost awkward, like wearing shoes that hadn't quite been broken in yet. Still, he wiped the counter calmly, and to his surprise, the moment passed quickly. Later that day, during a meeting, he forgot a small detail in his presentation. The old habit stirred again, ready with its usual criticism. But Elias felt the tension rising and quietly pressed his hand against his chest, just for a few seconds. A simple pause, the kind the old man might have approved of. He inhaled slowly and pictured the little clay pot in the park, dry soil softening under a gentle stream of water. The image settled something inside him. Instead of scolding himself, he simply made a note to correct the detail later, and the world, interestingly enough, didn't collapse. Each small moment felt like watering that fragile plant. Not dramatic, not heroic, just steady care. Sometimes he caught the harsh voice again, and when he did, he quietly answered it with a softer one. Not perfect, but patient. A week later, Elias returned to the park. The tiny plant looked different now. Its leaves stood a little taller, greener around the edges. Someone, perhaps the old man, had clearly continued tending it, and somehow, seeing that quiet progress warmed him. He crouched beside the clay pot, studying the leaves carefully. Growth hadn't happened overnight, but little by little, the plant had responded to care. It was doing what living things naturally do when given the chance. It was recovering. As Elias stood again, he realized something gently surprising. The same slow change had begun inside him as well. Not perfection, not constant peace, nothing that dramatic. Just a subtle shift in how he spoke to himself, and somehow, that small shift was beginning to change everything. A few days later, life offered Elias a small test. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just one of those ordinary moments that used to ruin his entire afternoon. He sent an email at work that contained a small mistake, a number slightly wrong. A colleague pointed it out in a short reply. In the past, this would have triggered the familiar storm. His thoughts would spiral quickly. How careless. You should have checked twice. The moment would replay in his mind again and again. Even after the problem was fixed, the tension would stay with him, like a knot that refused to loosen. This time, the reaction still tried to rise. Old habits rarely disappear quietly. For a brief second, the sharp inner voice appeared again. But Elias noticed it the way someone notices a cloud passing across the sky. Present, yes, but not permanent. He leaned back slightly in his chair. His hand rested lightly over his chest, just as he had practiced before. One slow breath in, another gentle breath out. The pause lasted no more than a few seconds. In that small space of quiet, the image returned again. The clay pot resting on the park bench, dry soil slowly softening under a careful stream of water. The fragile leaves responding to patience rather than pressure. The memory brought a calm clarity. Well, Elias whispered softly to himself, almost amused. Plants don't grow faster when someone yells at them. The thought made him smile faintly. So, instead of scolding himself, he simply corrected the number. Then he sent a brief, polite follow-up message. Something interesting happened afterward. The tension that once lingered for hours simply didn't stay. The mistake had been real, yes, but it had also been small, human, easily repaired. Without the harsh inner attack, the moment lost its power. Later that evening, Elias walked through the park again. The tiny plant greeted him quietly from its clay pot. Its leaves were greener now, stretching gently toward the fading sunlight, and as he watched it sway in the evening breeze, he sensed that another quiet lesson was still waiting to unfold. That evening, the park felt especially calm, the kind of calm that arrives just before the sun finally slips below the trees. Elias sat beside the familiar bench, watching the little plant sway gently in the breeze. Its leaves moved softly, catching the last threads of golden light, and somehow, the quiet moment seemed to carry a small invitation. The old man appeared again, as quietly as he had the first time. He walked along the path with slow, steady steps and greeted Elias with a warm nod. "Ah," he said softly, glancing at the clay pot. "It looks like our little friend has been doing some growing." There was a gentle pride in his voice. Elias smiled. "It seems like it only needed a bit of care," he said. The old man tilted his head slightly, amused by the simplicity of the statement. "Yes," he replied. "That's usually how it works. Most living things respond surprisingly well to kindness." For a moment, they watched the plant together. Then the old man picked up a fallen leaf from the bench and turned it slowly in his fingers. "Tell me something," he said thoughtfully. "When you make a mistake, what is the first thing your mind says?" The question hung gently in the air. Elias considered it. "Oh, it used to say plenty of unpleasant things," he admitted. The old man chuckled quietly. "Most minds do that," he said. "They've had a lot of practice." He placed the leaf back on the bench and leaned forward slightly. "But there is a small exercise I like," he added. "It only takes a moment." He tapped his chest lightly with 2 fingers. "Whenever you notice that harsh voice, pause for a breath. Just one breath." He continued calmly. "Place your hand here if you like. Then say something to yourself the way you would speak to a good friend. Nothing dramatic, just a simple sentence of patience. Something like, 'It's okay. Mistakes happen.' Or 'Let's try again tomorrow.' Or even just 'Easy now. We're learning.'" The words didn't need to be perfect. They only needed to be kinder than the voice they replaced. Elias looked again at the small plant in its clay pot. Its leaves moved easily in the evening air, no longer curled in quiet struggle. It had simply responded to care, little by little. And as the sky deepened into soft shades of blue, he realized the same practice could belong to anyone willing to try it. The sky above the park slowly turned the color of soft evening ink. Streetlights flickered on one by one along the distant path. Elias remained on the bench for a while longer, watching the little plant in its clay pot. The leaves were open now, catching the last warmth of the fading light, quietly alive in a way that felt almost peaceful to witness. The old man sat beside him without speaking. Sometimes wisdom arrives without needing many words. The plant swayed gently as the evening breeze moved through the trees, not struggling, not forcing itself to grow, simply responding to the care it had been given. After a while, the old man finally spoke again. "You see," he said softly, nodding toward the clay pot, "peace rarely appears where there is constant pressure." He folded his hands calmly in his lap. "It tends to grow where kindness is allowed to stay." Elias watched the small leaves moving in the air. It suddenly felt obvious in a way that didn't need explanation. The plant hadn't changed because someone demanded it. It changed because someone created the conditions for it to thrive. And slowly, gently, life did the rest. Perhaps the mind worked in much the same way, not as something to conquer or punish into perfection, but as something living, something that softens when treated with patience. A place where warmth allows quiet strength to return. A place where peace can quietly take root. The old man stood and brushed a bit of dust from his coat. "Most people try to force their way into peace," he said with a faint smile. "They tighten every screw inside themselves." He glanced once more at the clay pot. "But gentleness tends to do a far better job." Elias nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it settle inside him. The way he spoke to himself shaped the entire landscape of his days. Every thought was a drop of water or a grain of sand. Over time, those tiny moments created the environment where his mind lived. And the difference between harshness and kindness was everything. The old man gave the plant one last small watering before leaving. The soil darkened, drinking in the quiet nourishment. Then he tipped his hat lightly and continued down the path. The park returned to its gentle stillness, and Elias remained there, watching the little plant breathe calmly in the evening air. For the first time in a long while, his own thoughts felt softer too. Not perfectly silent, not magically healed. Just calmer, warmer, a little more patient than before. Like a place where something peaceful had finally been planted, and where, with care, it might continue to grow.